good morning or afternoon. And my welcome is going to be just for us all together to take a moment to just sort of arrive. Some of us rush to get here or have breakfast or lunch or whatever else took place this morning or afternoon. And I just want us all to just sort of maybe just together collectively take a few deep breaths. I'm curious what will take place today, the conversation between Lynn and Donata. I really appreciate that it's organic and maybe not as planned as some of our other programs. For me, that's always really fresh to hear what comes new. And so I just again want to wish everybody a warm welcome and thank you, Donata, for being here with us and offering your presence today.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I don't have to introduce Donata, but I would love to say that I am so pleased to have this conversation with you, Donata. You have done such wonderful work of bringing Jean's philosophy alive and bringing all of the dimensions of it to people. And your way of teaching is amazing to me because you're able to take such complexity and, in a way, abstractions and bring them as Jean wished and was his whole message, bring them into our bodies and bring them into our hearts. And so to talk to you about Jean Genlin and to talk about Jean's presence with you and his philosophy is going to be wonderful. Also, I want to say to everybody, Donata is initiating a new form, which I love, which is this dialogue rather than presentation. And I think this will be very useful for our project because we really are about conversation. We're not about presentation in this group. And so we're going to start the dialogue. And another thing I want to say is that usually, well, in the last few years, we've had a birthday party for Jean Genlin around Christmas, which is his birthday was on Christmas, right? And we didn't do that this year because we want to include people who can't make this this time. And so we're going to do it another time, another time of year when we can include some of the people who haven't gotten to speak at those other events. So Donata and I are going to talk about Jean Genlin and about his philosophy and how it was communicated to us. So after saying all that, I'm going to take a breath. And just bring all of you in with me, here with me. Many of us have been touched by Jean's philosophy without really knowing the philosophy, because it is so endemic to his focusing approach and to therapy and to the practice of therapy. But it is amazing to really look at the philosophy for the philosophy. So I'm going to start with a little story, and then I want to hear very much. I'm very curious about how Donata met Jean and how the philosophy came alive for her. Many of you know the story about how I met Jean at a workshop for therapists on experiential therapy. And I'm not going to tell that story, but I'm going to tell the story of later on when he left New York and he and I were separated and out of touch for a few years. And I became a psychoanalyst and was very excited about relational psychoanalysis and all that I was learning and experiencing, so teaching. And Jean came back to New York and just called me up and said, "Oh, I'm back in New York." And I was so surprised and delighted that he was in New York and I was going to see him. So I came to his apartment, not knowing what to expect from this visit, because Jean didn't just visit with people in these ordinary ways like everybody else that I knew visited with people. Catching up and chit chat. So as I expected, Jean came and gave me a big hug and said, "I'm so happy to see you, Lynn. The world is in a very difficult place because everybody is involved with postmodernism, and they think that you could just do therapy without having anything at the bottom. Anything that we can know, that we can't know anything." And so I took a gulp and a sip of my coffee and I said, "Oh, I had to get myself ready for this conversation." I said, "I'm very excited about how postmodernism has affected psychoanalysis, because it used to be that we believed as therapists that we knew things about the client, that we knew what was in their unconscious, that we could interpret to the client what their real problems were and how to solve them. And that was a terrible, terrible era. I couldn't even study psychoanalysis in that time. And now we understand that it's all in our perspective, and it's how we're living it, how we're seeing it, that it's in us. And Jean took that in and said, "Oh, yes, of course, that is a step forward. But you can't stop there, because it isn't just in us." And he paused and he said, "Well, nothing is objective, because you can't be outside of reality looking at reality. But nothing is subjective either, because it can't just be in you. If it's in you, it's in the world. You are this interaction with the world. So there is nothing that's objective and nothing that's subjective, but it's all in the interaction. And what you know about the client isn't something you made up. Of course, you know it because the client is living in you." And I was so excited. I said, of course I believe that, but I never thought that before. And so I wanted to call it intrasubjective or something, supra-subjective or something. And Jean wanted to call his approach postmodernism, which I really loved also, that it's all radically contextual, but it's in the interaction. So that's my story, Donata, to begin us off. And now I'd like to hear your interactions with Jean.
Yes. Well, but first of all, thank you very much, Lynn, for sharing that story. And also thank you very much for inviting me again. And I really appreciate so much that we can just talk, because I also already just listening to you was so inspiring. And, I very often have this situation that I just sit in front of a blank paper and I must write something, or I'm invited to a group and I must say something. And I find it so difficult because, you don't know where to enter into, and you might say so many things that are not really relevant.
Mm.
And I think this, this happening of a dialogue is already such a immensely interesting thing, because of all the possibilities that one could speak about. Then immediately some kind of relevant context is there,
In a way, it's so much more in keeping with
Yeah.
the philosophy, right?
Yes.
That we are interaction, and
Exactly.
what's in me is in you and the group, and we're picking up what is relevant for all of us.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, and I very much appreciated how in what simple terms you kind of spot on kind of, touched this main thing, that with Jenlin's thinking, it's not just subjective, and it's not just objective, and it changes the whole, it changes this whole ground, and how difficult it is to speak about this ground in all those powerful concepts we have, subject and object, or postmodernism or postmodernism. and for me, the more I studied him, the more I began to appreciate how difficult it is to find words for this ground, for this ground which is so obvious to us, and which we already kind of conceptualize in ways that make it so unhelpful to speak about this, where this entangled fabric of experiencing which we are all in.
Yes.
Which we all take part in. So
I
while
love,
you were,
I love the way you said that, this ground, this right, this interaction that we're all in, that we're
all in, exactly. And that's also, I just the other day, I'm here with my daughters, and they also had friends, and for the first time we did a kind of New Year's thinking at the edge with this younger generation, and they experienced something which I always experience in thinking at the edge, that it just takes a little bit more of listening, a little bit more of attending to what you mean, and you touch this web, so that even if you speak about something which is totally specific to you, the way you say it is relevant for somebody else, even though she is concerned with something totally different. So I think there one kind of so quickly one touches this web somehow, like, in thinking at the edge, I also, if we work with students, then the student might be occupied with artificial intelligence, and just going a bit deeper with thinking at the edge, the student listening to her that is, thinking about some ethnological problem, it becomes so interconnected in ways that are so difficult to say. What the one person says becomes relevant with the other, and we just need to go, like, thinking at that, just like going, like diving a little bit deeper, and all of a sudden we are more immersed, or something like this. I don't know.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And it also erases that distinction that we make between the theoretical and the personal.
Yes.
When you're thinking, whatever you're thinking about, it brings thinking alive to this deeply personal place that has to be, that any real thinking is from the person, it's in the person, it's relevant to the people.
Yes, that's so right. That's so right. And again, because of a tradition which kind of separated the personal from the objective, we make it so hard for us to acknowledge the source, and to care for it in academia, because one always needs to be objective and theoretical and universal, and one kind of hides the personal or the subjective, or at least At least in many traditions, that's still the case. And I think that's why also genderless philosophy is so important, because he creates a new way of speaking about this personal, that it's never just personal. Again, it's, you know, it's personal and it's collective, and it's he just discards these notions and says it's kind of implicit. It's you know, and by conceiving it differently, we can then care for it in new ways. You know, when we think, very often I just realized, you know, in very often one kind of conceals the sources from which one thinks.
Yeah.
That's a pity, and that has a big impact on how we communicate. It makes things much more opaque somehow, you know. Yeah, but okay. Let's not go more into this. Maybe I should say a little bit. What do you want me to? Maybe you can tell me what you want me to say next.
I just want to say back something that you said there, because you said, well, that's enough of that. Very important that that the thinking isn't just the thinking, it's the source of it, it's how it came to us. It's thinking is always about the person. You can't really separate the ideas from the person who has thought them, and then as they're thinking them, you're picking them up in your own distinct, absolutely individual way, and that all of us are microcosms of, you know, of this whole great big everything. So I just wanted to underline that about it. It makes a difference. If I were going to just talk about postmodernism and postmodernism or something, it would be pretty dry, I think. But if I talk about how that came to me with Jean Genlin, it becomes personal and the story.
Exactly.
So I guess I'd love to hear how you first came upon Jean's work and in your relationship with that work.
Yes, I will want to say something about that, but maybe I still reflect a little bit what you just.
Please, that's our dialogue.
I so much liked how you translated the personal to the microcosmic. Yes. And I think what helped so much is that also Jean translated the personal, you know, that the personal is always body environment interaction. And that's why what anybody thinks is always, you know, the stuff that is way beyond just the skin line or just the personal. It is always this unique and specific, highly complex interaction of world that we are, you know, and that's why what you say can be so relevant to me, yeah, because you clarify something from this whole mesh that helps me clarify something. And then, like you said, because we devalued the personal so much, we always, in academia at least, we talk about big concepts and they become so empty and so boring. And I find it so fascinating that if you go back to this source, you know, of your own lived experience, of your own lived interaction with environment, how immediately also those concepts are filled with new meaning or life. It goes so fast.
Yes, so fast. Yeah.
And then also, if you talk about your notion of postmodernism by going back to this fuzzy source where the concepts also become, you know, it's always so difficult to say, why does a concept matter? Because then all those things, all those roots, you're immediately at the edge. And then people can follow, and one can kind of sense the sources of meaning that go into this concept. And
Yes.
sometimes have the feeling, it's such an organic thing, a concept, and the way we use them by cutting off this source, they become literally dry,
Yes, literally dry. I love that. There's no truth there.
Yeah, exactly. And
this is a little bit of an aside, but I'm doing a lot of work these days on community empowerment and trying to enable people to have social political discussions without being so polarized.
Yes.
And one of the things that's so important is if somebody is saying something that is kind of an enemy view.
Exactly.
And you just say to that person, instead of, oh, blah, 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 instead of that, you say, oh, why is that important to you? Exactly. How does that touch you? Mm-hmm. It's amazing. I mean, sometimes people won't go there, of course, but if the person can go there, it changes the whole nature of the discussion. If you understand why, I mean, and that's what Jean did with me. I was all in favor of what was an enemy for him, postmodernism. And then, he invited me to say why it was important to me, and that changed our discussion.
Exactly. And I think really, especially in this context now of social and political debates, one comes to see how much it matters. I would say it's like a junction. Either you disconnect what the words mean from the person and just say, you said this, and this has these implications, no matter what you mean.
Yes.
You said this concept, you said this, and this is this implication, and that is why we and I think this is really how I want to understand much better, but this is the turning point. Because if you go into this direction, those kind of systemic implications, conflict and war is so close. And the turning point to saying, okay, this is the concept, but what do you mean by it? Why is it important to you? It opens the concept immediately, and people have the chance to maybe say it in different words, and all of a sudden you understand maybe much more than you even hoped to be able to understand. You didn't even want to understand this person so well. But so I think this is such a turning point to connect. And that's why so many people say it's such a piecework. If I introduce people to think, they always say it's such a piecework, but they don't really know exactly why. But I think there's so much into this, do I just go with the concepts? And then I can pin people down and say, this is what you meant, that's why you are wrong and you're the enemy and you have no chance, you have no voice anymore. Or if we say, okay, this is, like Jen said, it is a concept, it's one way of carrying forward, maybe it doesn't carry forward well enough. Now, just what do you mean with it? And that's the living source of meaning. And I just find, especially in this context of political discourse and social debate, this philosophy makes such a difference.
I remember Jean telling me that he, as a Jew who had escaped from the Nazis as a child, a harrowing escape, studied at a Catholic university, and was studying the dogma that Jesus died to save us from our sins. And I asked Jean, how was that for you? And he said, oh, I focused on what does that mean? What is the world, and how am I if that?
Oh, that's so lovely.
And he could feel into the deep meaning of that. And his face lit up. He said, oh, it was amazing to me. He was so open. And
so amazing. And that fits so well to his story. And maybe many of you know that he said, you know, he could translate his point into many languages. With a Marxist, he could because he could kind of go into from where it comes, you know, or kind of sense the relevance of those different.
yes, I hadn't heard him say that, but I can certainly picture that. It inspires me. I think, oh, how could I say what I want to say to all of these different groups of people?
Yes. Yeah.
And pick up just right where they are. What I experience in the interaction would be important to them.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. Yeah. Well, I really, and I do want to dwell there still a little bit, because I think we cannot underestimate the difference if we learn to think that what we mean is constantly this fuzzy felt thing that we give different kinds of forms, and the forms affect the way we feel it. I think really a different kind of, and I'm always a bit shy and I feel awkward to say such a big thing, but I really think as if a different world starts if you conceive it like this. It has so many implications.
Yes, oh, I love that. I have to say that back.
Yeah.
It came with this shyness that I think are really meaningful things come with. That when you think this way, a world opens up, a world starts.
Really, and
so many implications.
It has so many implications that we, you know, that we really consider. That we consider language always, or the way we always as some kind of, and now I use the word construct, as some kind of construction that may serve us, but we must take it back because it must serve our living understanding, our living and our mutual understanding. And at the moment we cling to the construction, you know, and we kind of absolutely undercare from where it comes from.
Yes.
Yeah. And then so much can be, then we constantly destroy our, well, maybe I say ... here, but there's so much there. I would once like to be more able to, yes, we construct together. Charles Hare is just saying, yeah.
I think maybe people want to be brought into this conversation, but I just want to say that when you say think this way,
I
wonder if we could, I mean, there's so much about the this way, but I wonder if we could say this way, meaning being in touch with the meaning of it for us, being in touch with how it is in us, it lives in us.
Exactly.
That's the source of what we would say the bodily felt sense, but for whom that language isn't. It's what's alive for us. Why
what's alive, exactly. Yeah.
Yes.
And acknowledging that, you know, that what we mean constantly comes from this living felt dimension, which is also very, very fuzzy and very, very insecure and very, very vulnerable. The most powerful convictions, if we go a little bit deeper, you know, it's already difficult to say why it's so important.
Yes, exactly. And then you know you've gotten there when it's difficult to say.
Yes.
And instead of feeling like, oh, now I'm off track, it's difficult.
And I mean, and what I mean is, if we think in a way that we constantly acknowledge these kinds, you know, this kind of, I want to use the word source again, this kind of source that is our constant living, experiencing, you know, way of being in the world, then listening to others and to ourselves becomes so much more important. And I think there is also some sense of, a totally different kind of humbleness, because really, what we really know is so little, and it constantly changes, and a different kind of curiosity to what is really going on, and that's where, that's what I meant with it's not a way of, it's a way of thinking that acknowledges the sensing as a root, which which constantly responds,
which constantly responds,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't stay the same.
No, it constantly responds.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is there anything else we want to share before we allow people to enter our conversation?
Yeah, and Charles Harris just saying that explains why people go there so rarely. The fuzzy vulnerableness is not easy to be with. Yes.
Yes, that's right.
And that's how everything connects again. That's why it's so consistent, this focusing practice. One needs to learn it. It's not just, there's something to be learned.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's utterly okay if people come in with their questions, then one can, again, maybe connect to different points or clarify something or
I still want to know more about your relationship with Jean, but we could ask that later. Maybe we could have people respond to what we've said so far, and then maybe go back to that.
Yes.
I'm getting my gallery view so I can see everybody.
Yes, me too.
So I have to say hello again because I've been in my conversation with Donata, and here we are. And now we're having a conversation with all of you. So whatever is there for you, we want to hear.
I would like to share something. It's Nati, Lynn, and Donata. So this is such a rich and interesting conversation, and there's so much going on inside of me. And I'm right now feeling this vulnerability because I'm sharing this living felt dimension and trying to speak from there and trying to speak about everything that came up for me as you were sharing. And there was such richness there, because when we listen, when I can be given here, I'm going to go to my experience right now, when I can be given this space to speak from that place that you were mentioning, from that place that is the place where I am in touch with my aliveness, with my feeling, with my sensing. First of all, I feel that I'm allowed to be. I feel that I'm allowed, that there's something about my identity that is being valued, that's being acknowledged, that's being recognized, that allows me to go much deeper into what I'm sensing. So I really believe that this kind of interaction, like when we ask somebody else, what do you mean by that? We are really showing the person that we are interested, that we want to see them, that we want to listen to what's going on inside of them. And this allows for that in the person, in me, to come alive, and to be named, even though I don't know how to name it, even though I don't have the words, but I'm being given the permission to think inside there and to bring it out. And this richness, this as it's brought out, I believe that it's the richness that there is inside of each one of us, each one of us in our own uniqueness and our own special thing that we have to bring out into the world. And that's what makes this, that thinking in this way, as you were saying, Lynn, a world opens up. Because we can think from so much more, from the I in me and the you in you and the we in we, the us. And it opens such a new world. So
Thank you. Thank you, Nati. That was beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
that really wrapped it up in quite a way. And I just want to add something, Nati, because just yesterday my colleague Sigga from Iceland sent me this little YouTube film from Jen on my relation to an ultimate. And he says something quite interesting there. He says that in the East, Eastern meditation techniques, that's nothing new. He very often said that they kind of drop down below the personal. Yeah. But what he says, just a one sentence in this YouTube that he says, but also the West is so much deconstructing the personal, in the medical systems, in the economical systems, in also our scientific system, and I resonated so deeply that this kind of turn, the Gendlian turn, is I am allowed to be. I deeply resonate with it. There's an allowance to be the persons, the creatures we are, and that opens a world. It needs this acknowledgement, or else it just stays closed. And and etc. etc. What you said. Yeah.
Yes. I would love it. Send us that YouTube. I would love to.
Yeah. Yes, I can. You can find it on YouTube. It's called My Relation to an Ultimate. I will just Eugene Gendon. I will just write it in the chat.
Yes, great. If when we're asking people what it means to them, we're invoking the person. We're calling out that rich, deep person, not just the idea, but the whole, what's making that idea.
Yeah.
Donata, I wanted to.
I'm sorry, but I think Anna William had her hand up for quite a time.
Oh, okay.
Please, then you, or she put the hand down again.
No, she's there. She just muted.
Muted.
Anna, unmute yourself.
Okay. Sorry. I'm working with a local League of Women Voters to institute some conversations across the divide in small groups in a community that has very divided political opinions. And I love this concept of the interaction. The word context, I immediately started taking notes when that came up. But what I'm struggling with is that part of the context right now, certainly in the United States, and I think in many places, is a context of deliberate falsehoods being contrived to control people and to stir their passions, to stir that place of meaning for them. And when you listen to some of the people who assaulted the Capitol, they believe deeply that they were the heroes. And that's their context. And I'm struggling. I mean, I can see how asking somebody, what is so important to you in that? And I really want to know how you got there. But when that, and I see that as an invitation and giving them an opportunity to feel heard and recognized and valued. And yet their context includes this morass of conspiracies and falsehoods and it's somehow we have to find a pathway to getting to that part of them, and there's so much mistrust in that world, that to get them to the where they're willing to share that part of them that made them vulnerable to all of that, that the real context underneath the conspiracy and the hate is that vulnerable person you're talking about. That and it's very hard for people in a context so heavily laden with mistrust to be brave enough to reveal that tender place. And we've been working with language and finding ways to phrase things that are non-controversial and talk about what it means to be American, and putting it in that broader kind of context. And yet, and I guess that's my question. And yet, now what?
I think that's such a big question that you're asking, but for me, just what comes to me is I have to go to that place first. Not to say, oh, but these are all, conspiracy theories, and this is all, but to go to the place of really wanting to know that other person and being vulnerable myself and saying, for me, it means this because this is important in my life, and I'm worried about this. We want the other person to be vulnerable, and we don't want to be vulnerable sometimes.
Yes, one word that I have found really helpful is using the word neighbor, because we are neighbors with very different political things, and the same people who would scream at you at a community meeting will pull their truck over and help you change your tire if they see you on the side of the road. And so when I talk about what I want for our communities, I want us to be good neighbors. And that helps. That's my vulnerable place in a way.
Yes.
And that helps. But it's still a challenge.
Right.
I think that's so, first of all, I'm full of respect for this kind of work, because I think this is the most tough, and I think that's the most tough situation. When the ground is already through social media and is already so triggered, so deeply triggered in sense-making patterns that undermine an open way of thinking, or I don't know. It's such a huge challenge, and and I have no clue, but I find it very promising how you start with concepts that maybe resonate like neighbor. That one kind of maybe start, that one opens up the concept neighbor. And maybe one can even work with other concepts, shared concepts, and invite fresh experiences.
Yeah.
Invite fresh experiences. I remember I just have a tiny experience, not comparable with what you do, but in the Corona crisis, there were really, like everywhere, divides going through families, and a very, very close person to me was totally caught up in a different universe of theories, and for me it was very clear that she was very irrational, and then I did thinking at the edge, and I took fresh experiences, and I realized that my trust is not better founded. My trust to the medical system is not better founded. I don't have much more information than her information. She trusts the opposite. It's a very personal kind of trust. And then I went even lower, and I touched a kind of trust in life that I could then sense she has it too. And all of a sudden, I realized that all these opinionated things is really just the surface. That in some bottom thing we're very connected, and it totally helped me talk with her, because I just realized that the opinions are on very narrow. So maybe inviting fresh experiences to concepts that are important to them, I have no clue, could open up, I don't know, but I would be very interested to hear how more of your work, maybe I can, if it's possible, maybe I can reach out. And really, because I think somehow this is where it should work. And there we must become creative, how it could work. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very much pioneering work.
Hi, just like to say something.
Mhm.
Yeah, when you talk about neighbor and talking about focusing and starting with ourselves, if our own inner beliefs, and not looking outside and saying, well, this other person has to change, and looking, for instance, I live in a neighborhood where there are people here who think very differently than I do politically. And during the Trump era, I would get sometimes hostile looks and things like that, but all besides the point. I start to smile at some of these people now. I just, it's coming from my inner place of saying, okay, let me see where I can find a way of meeting, like you're talking about a fresh place, a new place. Because if we hold on to our rigidities also, we're talking about vulnerability. And maybe in that way, I can come to understand somebody and maybe find things about that person in our humanness. And that humanness is something that I think is so important to connect to as well. And forgetting about all that other stuff that interferes with the connection. So I just wanted to say that from my own personal experience.
There's a concept that I love in Jean's work with psychotherapists about being on its side. And what that means is not necessarily being on the side of the perspective that the person is coming from or the behavior, but being on its side, and wonderful it that is trying in its way to carry forward, to have more life, and finding what is true and right about something that seems wrong and crazy, or bad, or whatever it seems to us, to find what's trying to come there. What's true about that? What's about that that I don't know that this person knows?
I think that Annecy Bess raised her hand at the beginning, and then Pauline and Charles, or yes?
Donata, if,
I think I was first, but I don't mind. Annecy can go
no,
first.
no, Donata is correct. I was first, but
Oh, I'm
Charles
sorry.
Charles seemed to have wanted to respond to something that Anna said, Donata. And so if
Actually, I wanted to
Charles,
respond to something that Anna said, but
oh,
that's okay.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
yeah.
Annecy.
No, Charles, you could go and Pauline could go and Donata, I could go later because I have a part of me that wants to cry and I'm asking her to just sit a little bit and calm down and then I'll speak when she's calmed down, and that way when I talk, I'm not crying. Okay.
Crying is okay. Well, it's very brief. I think that the thing is to move away from wanting to change the other person's beliefs, and starting with connecting with them as a person, with their feelings, their felt sense, they say in NBC we should have empathy first and education second. if there is a need for education, maybe we need to be educated too. But always that connecting first, and that's I think where you bring the concept of neighbor. It's a way of saying we have the same human needs. We are together. We both feel, we both trust and want to be able to trust life the way Donata says. That is so essential to all of us. And then we can share, you know, I see that you got to these views and I've gotten to different views. Perhaps we can try to understand how we got to these different ways of thinking about things, but we have a dialogue at that point. We're no longer in a disputation. That's one of the things Lynn talks a lot about, sort of, how do we establish dialogue? So we're not arguing, we're listening, and I think we're just saying what everybody's been saying, essentially. And I really like, yeah.
I wonder, Charles, if I could put what you said in a little different order.
Go
Empathy
ahead.
first,
Mm-hmm.
being educated second, and then educating, if that comes, sort of
Yeah.
third. But if I come in, like, what can I learn from this?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. So that humility of like, I don't have all the answers. That's what like Donata was saying. Well, if I step back, I mean, how am I so sure about what I know, supposedly, right? And how can I be sure? I think maybe with hindsight, maybe some of the reactions against COVID were extreme. And in fact, we've gotten so out of normal life that I don't know how we ever get back again. We lived with flus and we lived with all kinds of other things before. You know, so I think there might even have been something to be said for the view that we overreacted, perhaps. I'm not saying that, I don't know. I'm just saying I want to stay open to that.
I would just like to quote William James, his wonderful little booklet, very honest, Will to Believe. I don't know if you know it. And there's this one quote, our faith is faith in someone else's faith. And in the greatest matters, this is most the case.
Wow.
Because all the big truths, we did research them ourselves, yes. And, you know, and all the big questions, they came down to us. And it really brings it so well. So it's different sorts of faiths that are also, you know, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Would you say the quote again, please?
The quote is from William James, Will to Believe. I will put it in the, yeah, it's our faith is faith in someone else's faith. And in the greatest matters, this is most the case. And I think he gave this, you know, in one of the Ivy League universities, speaking to natural scientists, and said it's, you know, this is not just religion, this is not just in religion, it's also in science. Okay, but now what I think there was Pauline.
Hi, Donata. Donata, am I pronouncing that right? Can you hear me?
Yes.
And hi, Lynn. And hi, Charles. And it's kind of a reaction. So it was a bodily sense, and I really enjoyed the conversation, you know, the richness and the holding of the conversation between you and Lynn. You know, it was that there was such meeting, you know, so maybe it was because the intention to come from that place, you know. So, and I'm wondering is the universal a different identity, you know, rather than the politics of the present, you know, that they're just an identity. So I just had a flush of excitement or life energy in me when Anna started to talk about American politics, you know, because it's like, for anyone that's not identifying as an American, it's kind of, well, that's just another person's point of view, you know, so that it's So it was the rush of excitement in me to respond and saying, you know, that's an identity. But I'm glad it sort of, I had the time to just sit with it. And what came forward for me very clearly and very richly was that empathy first and then education. But I heard it in a different way when Lynn gave it back to Charles and say, what can I learn from this, you know? And what I learned was, it was my rush of like, I'm not American. I don't care about Trump. And, you know, in some way that was local, you know, and it was like, well, what about the rest of the world, you know? So that's what I've learned from my education in this moment. You know, what have I learned? It's like, oh, I felt left out because of the the focus of Americans. So that's really rich and soft and easy and not as frightening as the first brush, you know. So thanks, really love that learning in me. Yeah, thank you.
I love that you learn from that rush of energy and paying attention to that. It's really important.
Yes, yeah, really new. Yeah, so thank you.
So Annecy, is now a good time to share for you? Better time, at least.
Thank you, Donato. I'm glad I had that little space in between. You said some things that, I mean, I love your interaction with Lynn. It was just so beautiful to see that dialogue. It was just the way that, it was like a dance, but you said something about thinking in the edge that really resonated for me. And then Nati, when Nati spoke, it even opened up more. It kind of, when Nati spoke, it clarified more what was inside me that I wanted to share. And she spoke about, and you did too, about that kind of living sense dimension inside that's trying to speak from that space. And I remember taking a course on thinking at the edge very early on. And I realized that I'm bilingual, so I speak in English, but I also speak in Spanish. And when I write stories, I write fiction, I write them in English because that's the way I write. But when I took the course on thinking at the edge, I discovered that English speaking is so different than Spanish speaking, and that Spanish writing and speaking and thinking goes deep into my belly. It goes deeper and deeper. And I learned that like in that course. And I said, okay, I'm going to take a story, I'm going to write it in English, but then I'm going to go in my belly and write it in Spanish and see what comes up. And it was completely like the language is so different.
Wow.
And so one summer, I just did that to go. And when Nati spoke, she said other things that reminded me of that experience. She said to speak from that place, from that aliveness, from that sensing, because the mother tongue is what is the mother tongue. Even if you learn English, your mother tongue is your mother. It's like connected deep to some rooted place. So I am not a good Spanish writer. So I wrote the story in English. It was about my late husband who passed away in 2011. And the story was about picking up my daughter. I had, she would visit her dad, her biological dad, on the weekends. She's 17 at that time. But my husband, my late husband, would go with me to pick her up. And out of respect to my ex-husband, who's now married with a child, he would wait outside and I would go upstairs. And his little daughter was like 4, and she wanted me to give her butterfly kisses, like with my eyes. And that's something that my ex-husband and I would do when we were teenagers. So it was like a combination of all this love, But when I wrote it in Spanish, I wrote it in English, then in Spanish, somebody heard me read it in English and wanted it for a Spanish-speaking anthology. And I said, oh, I have a Spanish version that I wrote myself that is very deep in my womb. And he took it and he edited better because my Spanish was a little bad. And it was so different. Like when I would look at it from English language to Spanish language, it had a deeper tummy sense, like a deeper aliveness. And so I want to thank you, Donata, for bringing up that memory for me, and also for Nadi speaking from a deep place about all of that. And when you were speaking, I knew there was something in me that I wanted to say, but then it kind of like bubbled up as you continue speaking. And then Nati kind of brought it up for me, and it brought such emotions that for a moment when I raised my hand, then I couldn't speak. So I was glad other people spoke and said. But then when Anna spoke, I studied Bowen family therapy, and everything Anna was speaking about reminded me. Bowen said that when a society becomes the way our society is right now, is that anxiety is so, because Bowen said that anxiety is what created dysfunction in family, but he also felt that anxiety created dysfunction in society. The anxiety becomes so intense that people need to be in togetherness, and then groups are formed. It's me and us and the other. And he also spoke about that increased societal anxiety becomes worse when there's a fear of resources. And you're going to see boundary issues, people crossing borders, and people feeling like their land needs to be protected. And I felt like a lot of that is going on now. I live in the country, and I live upstate New York, and I am surrounded by Trump 2024 and fuck Biden. And yet, Anna, these people love me, and they care for me, and we're able to be together. I don't feel fear. But when my friends come, they're like, oh my God, it says fuck Biden. Oh my God, it says Trump 2024. But I don't know how that happens. And I think it's what you were saying is community. Everywhere I go, there are signs. Be kind to each other. Bring kindness to the world.
Yes.
Life is all about choices.
Yeah.
You are not alone. It's amazing. It's like it's a community thing. It's not about. I don't know how to explain how the whole community could be what you were saying, Lynn, in terms of bringing that to the world.
Right. Thank you, Annecy. Yeah. I think Ina wants to speak, and then I am aware that we this dialogue, we're so into it that our breakout rooms, we really want to give you 10 minutes to speak to each other, because I know that a lot of you haven't had a chance to say what's there for you, and most of you, and would love to have an opportunity. So let's hear from Ina, and then we're going to have breakout rooms for at least 10 minutes.
Sorry, I won't turn the camera on this morning. Donata, it's good to see you and hear you. And I just could breathe only when you said, and my facts and faith are based on little else than theirs. That's the only time I could start to breathe, just for everyone to know the quote, enemy is in your midst. So I appreciate the work Anna Willman is trying to do, but when you use terms like, and with such confidence, terms like conspiracy, and there's another one, it's because of a lack of investigation into all the facts. And so thank you, Charles, also just for breathing that statement that, maybe there was other ways we could have gone. And why? And who is behind, and what happened? What are the facts? People cut themselves off from different sources, so they can't really, they're not swimming in the same pools together, because they will not regard as credible other sources of even investigative reporting. Very few people have been willing to step forward and not have their careers ruined. So you have to seek out those people willing to look into exactly step by step what happened. It's kind of like the same inner investigations we do, but they're also outer investigations so that we can find common ground with actual happenings. So you can hear I'm frightened, and I'm not talking about babies, and that's really all I think about is the health and development of the next generation and of newborns. And I spend so much time with people whose heads are full of misguided, quote unquote, science about their babies, that they're literally paralyzed. I was with 4 couples in the last 48 hours whose lack of being able to see the person that they're awkwardly holding in their arms, or who is crying several feet away from them, and they don't touch them, and they can't figure out why they're crying. They can't figure it out. And indigenous cultures figured it all out. So why would we not learn from them? You know.
Thank you so much, Ina.
Lynn, may I still say something?
Yes, please.
Because what Ina said reminded me something that Jen Lynn said, you know, when there was this financial breakdown, 2007, 2008, and nobody knew anymore what was going on. And he said, finally, we need to acknowledge that nobody really knows. The system has become so complex that there are not the experts anymore who know everything. And while everybody found that very concerning, that nobody can know the complexity of the system anymore, Jen Lynn found it, I think, a very positive acknowledgement that we are now living in such a complex world. The hope that the truth is in facts might be, and this is something that I just wrote lately in a paper, and I try to elaborate, is maybe something very naive. Maybe we must really kind of acknowledge, you know, we are in such a complexity, it's almost impossible to know the truth. And we must kind of need to learn to do something else, you know, to speak beyond these, to have contact beyond these bubbles, to learn to think across it, to make, and that's what I want to say with my freedom, to make sense, to try to make sense from well, sorry, I'm sorry, it's still such a rough concept. But just what I want to say, that it's the hope on facts is maybe something naive from a simplified world, and that we now stand at the edge of having to learn to communicate and to find our paths in more honest, different ways, or something like that.
Oh, I think that's so profound. It excites me to think, how can we understand the world with more than facts? Not to disregard facts, but facts can also be contradictory, and it can be so complex that we don't really, in truth, base our beliefs on facts, because we believe the constellation of facts that support our beliefs, more than that we know enough facts about all the world and all the history to base our beliefs on the facts. But that's such a deep question, and I'm thinking that I think we're not going to do breakout rooms today. We are just in this dialogue together, and it would be cutting it off to send you off into little groups at this moment, since it's almost 9:30 to begin with. But I also just wanted to say to Ina, I'm so glad that you pointed up also the language, like the language of conspiracy theory, that has a whole world and perspective in it. And we don't even notice that when we use terms that are used from one world, that they may be disparaging to another world, and we take for granted those handles, and we take for granted that the people in this group are going to understand the handle word the way we understand it. And it takes a lot to recognize that those terms, those handle words, can mean something very different to another person.
May I just say something quickly here?
Sure.
I'm reminded of the blind men and their factual reports of their encounter with an elephant.
Mhm.
And I think that's very germane to this right now. And yes, even when I said the words conspiracy theories, there was a part inside me that cringed. So I really appreciate, Ina, you're saying that, because I believe there are conspiracies. We may not agree as to which conspiracies are real, but just because some are not real doesn't mean there aren't actual conspiratorial things happening. I don't believe in the all powerfulness of conspiracies that, so thank you.
It would be wonderful to do a thinking at the edge, to about what conspiracy theory means to us, what it deeply means, or maybe what we would want that word to mean, as Jean would say. I just wanted to say I loved what Jean Genlin said about the blind men and the elephant, that the elephant isn't just standing there. The elephant is eating the people who are the blind men and excreting them, and the people are eating the elephant, and there's interaction of all different kinds. The elephant isn't one thing. The elephant isn't a thing. The elephant is an interaction. It makes it so alive to think about the blind men with this interaction with this elephantness. So now we're not going to go into breakout rooms. So let's just take a moment to see what you want to say. That you've been holding, that's coming into being in you.
Here's what's coming to being for me right now, is that I was reading yesterday, I think it was in Thinking Without Patterns by Gene. He gave an example. He was talking about how much of modern thought is based on the principle that there's nothing inside, but everything is imposed from the outside. And his example of someone who did not think that way was Karl Marx, who believed that people had an inside, which was somehow being distorted by the society.
Mm.
Maybe I may say that I do sometimes, Jensen had a great talent of, conceiving the big gestalt of, but sometimes he then was also a little bit unjust, with whole traditions that we know inside. And that's then also a strength that sometimes came into weakness. So I also remember that it's almost sometimes, if I may say so, also a danger in the way in which he handles the tradition. You almost get triggered. You think they were all wrong. It's just really Genlin who's right. And that's just also not right. But in some way, I really do understand where he's coming from, because he really went this next step, which was very difficult to take because of so many implications. He really did that. But he could have, he would have been more received if he would have been a little bit more just with more yes, yes, he would have been a bit more, how do you say, careful, in careful dialogue with the traditions. I just want to put this in brackets.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Tanat.
And yet he took
very much. I think sometimes we can, in our idealization of Gene, we don't think further than he, which is what he wanted us to do. I mean, if he had been in dialogue with my little story with the postmodern psychoanalysts that I was talking about, he would have loved where they were going, and they would have loved where he was going, rather than just canceling them all out as wrong because they thought there was nothing at the bottom. As he put.
Yeah.
Lynn and Donata, hi. I know we're at the end, but if in any case you can just give 2 or 3 words of your experience of gendling, like now at the moment, like what would be, like if you would just take an image or a gesture or just a word about about the feel that he was and what you felt.
But just there's still a hand up from Banu. I just wanted to.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, thank you. I can't turn my video on because I'm literally in bed. And but I was very excited to hear about this and happy to be here. One of the things that came up when I was listening to people was when we're talking about beliefs, including this split into, people around COVID and conspiracies and this and that, we seem to be really attached to other people in our lives and other groups, whether they're imaginary or not. And that includes being attached to Genlin and what he believed and what he thought in. So a lot of our beliefs are based on, I cannot think like this, otherwise I would not be like these other people who I care about. So there seems to be a very relational component to our thinking. And that is also concerning because we're very good, especially lately, about creating these groups that says, if you think A, even if you don't think B, C, and D, then you're like these people. And if you think B, then you're like those people. And it creates such a good manipulation. Like there's a lot of propaganda from every different point of view. And that seems to be one of the ways that power moves. It seems by manipulating our associations. And I think when we're thinking about thinking, that also seems important. Like what we said about Gene, that if you feel very loyal to Gene, very rough and bad example, but you're going to be like, well, he thought psychoanalysts thought this. Therefore, and if I'm not, then I'm not loyal. And I was even thinking I had translated Focusing to Turkish. And now it's going to be reprinted, hopefully, and I'm retranslating it. And I'm cringing reading the first chapter about how he's talking down about psychotherapy being ineffective, which made a lot of sense. When I first read it, I really liked it. On the other hand, it has this tendency to say, okay, for me to do focusing, for somebody who's approaching it for the first time, does that mean they're going to be like, oh, this guy is cool, therefore psychotherapy is like this, which I think he's right about in many ways, but the context is different now that we're speaking in. And I was just thinking, as a translator, if I wrote this, that I don't agree with this, how would that sit? So as you were speaking, these are some of the thoughts that came to me. And maybe it's not a universal struggle for other people, but for me it is. When I'm loyal to someone, I really want to be able to think from the place they think, right? And my loyalty may not be just intellectual. And I just think it's kind of interesting to think about, to notice one of the invisible chains we often put ourselves into that nowadays we can't afford to, because the world is a lot more complex. And it's really scary to not be able to think, okay, my family, my friends, the people I agree with on all these other issues think this way. And I don't. It's somehow there's that threat that comes up with it that is interesting to contend with. I don't have an answer for it, but I just wanted to share what was coming up for me.
Thank you very much, Banu.
Thank you.
Lynn, can I ask Banu just one thing? Banu, there was something that you said that was a concern. Is it the part of therapy being ineffective in the textbook? And you're not.
Yeah, he goes so on and on about therapy being ineffective the way it's done, which is a beautiful point in so many ways, but it's not 1970s anymore, and it's not the US. We're not talking about people staying in psychoanalysis for 8 years. Like, I'm translating it for Turkish crowd.
Yes.
Therapy is new, and there is more effective ways of doing therapy, even if it's not effective the way we want it to. The way it's not effective is different than the one he's talking about. And I would hate for someone to read this and be like, here is why therapy sucks. If anything, I think more people need to be in therapy now, especially those that are committed to personal growth. I see it in these like quote unquote hippie circles. That's what I call them. People poop on therapy for very, very valid reasons, but it's also based on a misunderstanding. So that's what I'm referring to.
Thank you, Banu.
Thank you.
Yes, I want to go back to Anna's question because I was so curious also to give Donata an opportunity to say something about Jean as a person or that relationship before we only have about 4 more minutes.
That's a big question.
Oh, yes. Don't mean to put you on the spot at all.
Where can I begin? Well, I think I just must say that it was so deeply important and so crucially inspirational for me, this encountering Jean. And I think it also kind of that was something that was not so easy to say, this impression, but he kind of, it was like I realized this is the first real philosopher I met in my life, and I studied philosophy and so on, and it was as if he cleaned something for me, because he was so radical in his thought, and he was so focused to really bring something forward. He was so committed to something that was much bigger than a school or a system or a position. He was so committed to something so deep, yeah, and that kind of like it washed my it's a strange way of saying it, but it washed my sight. I was already post PhD, and I just knew the system, and I knew how to, so many things you kind of learn without being aware that you learn it, and things maybe you didn't want to learn, yeah. But he opened up the window so wide, and that was just so I want to quote Aina. I really could breathe deeply again in a way I forgot how one could breathe, and then interconnecting philosophy with personal transformation, and we were talking about the process model, and then at 5 o'clock he said, and why not do some focusing now, and all these levels together. It was such a life-changing encounter for me, and I think it also still needs time to really spill out what he meant, and what this relationship did for me. It changed my life in so many ways, and I'm not alone in that. So many people have experienced that, but yeah, okay.
Thank you so much, Donata. That was So beautiful to hear that
Mm.
counter. Yes. Did you seek him out? How did you first hear
Well,
about
yes, well, I met him, that was a coincidence in Zurich. And I must say, even though I had no clue what he did on the stage, he was supposed to do a talk, but he just did TAE with a person. It was very, very, very surprising for me. And then I must confess, and I don't know why, it was something really blind. I was at my PhD and I was looking where to go on, and I just went right up to him after and I said, "Are you not looking for an assistant?" I think he got a shock. Really was a little, who is this? And then I slowly started to read his articles, and I felt that I didn't understand anything. And then I started to write him a mail, and he responded to my great surprise. And then I wrote a first article, and that was kind of beginner's luck. He was very happy with that. And then I had this idea of translating the process model, and then our contact really started. And then I moved to Chicago, and we met regularly. I mean, I think every 3-4 months I was 3-4 days in Spring Valley. And then also there was before I left Chicago, we had weekly calls. He really wanted to make sure that I get it.
Wow.
Really wanted to make sure that I get it, because he sensed that I didn't get it. He sensed it, and and then he has a way to come up with some kind of procedure. And I think his procedure is, I will talk with her once a week until she gets it. And, yes, and then of course, there were also very challenging times at times, especially when writing the introduction. Very challenging, but that is a different story. But all in all, it was such a rich, and I feel just very, very, very grateful that I experienced this in my life.
Thank you so much. I hope, Donata, that we can continue this dialogue, maybe later on in the year. And I'd love to at some point talk about trading stories about fighting with Jean and the challenging moments, because
It's challenging.
it isn't spoken about as much.
Really, one must really say that it was at times super challenging, but that also, it also helped me grow, and it didn't crush my love. There's something about Jean that people loved him. It would be interesting to understand, what there was some kind of universal thing that was going on. I don't know. Yeah.
Can I just say one thing? I only met Jenlin once. It was on a weekend, one of his weekend things in Chicago. And he asked me to write him up a thing about politics, because I shared that I was a communist. And he wanted to know about focusing in communism, something along those lines. And I went home and I wrote something up. And then I had that shy moment, and I didn't seem adequate, and I didn't send it, and I never did give it to him. But the point I'm making is that Jenlin, he was doing this bold, brave, courageous thing in the world, but he was still a very humble person. I mean, I was a young woman with some degrees in political science and economics, and no reputation, no anything, just somebody. And he really wanted to know my opinion to deepen his own work.
That's right.
And I didn't give it to him because I had that shy moment. But he didn't want to be anybody's guru. It's a process model, not the process model, because he thinks there are other ways of looking at the world as a process than the way he devised.
Yes.
I just think that's really important to throw out there when we're talking about Genlin, because yes, we quote him because he has a lot of wisdom and there's a lot to learn from him, but he never wanted everybody to think just like him.
Well, I would say he didn't and he did. You know, there was a part of it that really wanted people to get how he was thinking and was so insistent on that. And of course, there was also his desire not to be the be all and end all, but to be a stepping stone for us. I think we're going to have to stop here. And Dorothy had a poem that I had written that we're going to hold off until next week for. We always end with a poem, but this time we're ending with these thoughts about Jean as a person. So next week we're having a very special meeting with Isabel, who will be talking about Martin Luther King Day and what our dream is. So tell your friends and colleagues about that and come if you possibly can. And Nada, I hope we can make another time to continue our dialogue. It was so rich and wonderful. Thank you. I will see you.
Also.
Thank you.
Very, very much.